You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
Good evening. We're delighted to have you all here with us tonight. Thank you all for joining us. We also appreciate the generosity of Procter Gamble sponsoring tonight's event. Procter Gamble provides branded products and services of superior quality and value, which serve nearly 5 billion of the more than 7 billion people on the planet today. Here in Iowa City, the two P&G plants, Beauty and Oral Care, employ more than 1,000 Procter Gamble employees and generate sales of more than $2.3 billion. Thank you very much, Procter Gamble and Mike Hughes, for your sponsorship. And we also thank International Automotive Components, our gold sponsor. We are going to be talking about chamber accomplishments this evening, and I would like to introduce the people who are responsible for our work. Steve Boyd, Director of Finance, Mackenzie Giroux, Director of Member Services, Allie Krogman, the Director of the Communications and Member Services Assistant, Rebecca Needs, who is our Vice President of Public Policy, Maggie Putman, who's Director of Special Events and Leadership Programs, and Allison Yoder, our Office Manager. And I know you all work in wonderful places, but I have to tell you, I am certain that nobody works with a more dedicated and positive team than do I. I am so grateful. They are a wonderful team. We're also supported by an extraordinary board of directors. If you're a board of director member at the chamber, would you stand, please, and be recognized? I know you're here. Well, our chamber is our members, and as such, your story is our story. And tonight, we want to give you just a brief glimpse of who we are.
My name is Sean Pearl. I got involved with the chamber probably 6 or 7 years ago. You know, I just wanted to figure out what's going on around town, and you know, our company here had been involved at Quality Care with the chamber in a lot of different ways.
My name's Emily McMahon. I have been a part of the chamber in a number of different ways. I have been a volunteer with EPIC. The chamber's been really, really helpful, at least for me personally, but I think it's so valuable here in this community.
My name is Mike Hughes, and I'm the plant manager at the Iowa City Beauty Care Procter Gamble plant. The chamber is a great unifying entity in our community and in our business community, which also helps the people in the community obviously ultimately bring and attract and retain some great talent here to the area.
I'm Gordon Fisher, and I'm a lawyer, and I have my own law firm. I went to Des Moines for about 20 years, and now I'm back. I've always loved Iowa City. Business is good, it's booming, and the chamber has been a big part of that. I've really been able to, through the chamber, meet with a lot of people that I wouldn't have otherwise met. They're so plugged in, they're doing so many neat things in so many different areas. They're not resting on their laurels, they're experimenting and looking for ways to even provide more value.
There's a lot that goes into making this community great, and I think that being involved in the chamber has helped expand my knowledge to know what the needs are out there and how we can get involved.
I think it adds so much to the quality of life in this area. It gives people a reason to stay here.
They've been very, very successful over the last 10 years, tremendously so, which to me gives me a really good, positive feeling going into the future.
The video that you just saw is the in-kind talent of our friends at Flow Media. They are more than videographers, they are storytellers. Thanks very much, Flow Media. We appreciate you. please join me now in welcoming our 2015 board chair from McCrossin Consulting, Mr. Scott Fisher.
Thank you, Nancy. Good evening. During the past year, our chamber celebrated milestones with enduring community impact, including the Iowa City Blue Zones designation. In 2012, we convened a group from business, education, government, the senior center, and the faith community to build consensus on and construct a Blue Zones application. We're proud of the sustainable city, school, and employer wellness initiatives and policy changes that resulted. We thank Mercy Iowa City and Pearson for their very generous Blue Zones support. Our economic vitality requires strong leaders. We proudly celebrated 25 years of the Chamber's Community Leadership Program, which has graduated more than 600 people with an in-depth understanding of education, government, social services, healthcare, and arts and culture in Johnson County. In 2015, your Chamber's major policy issues were successful, thanks to Johnson County legislators. The fuel tax supports much-needed transportation infrastructure, and the region's performance-based funding model no longer poses a threat to the University of Iowa and our local economy. In an effort to be a more nimble and responsive organization and to leverage member expertise for greater community business impact, the board approved a task force model initially focused on education. A special thanks to Chuck Peters for his leadership efforts with this task force. We look forward to greater innovation and impact as the Chamber applies this model to other areas. In closing, I'd like to thank 2014 past board chair Rick White as he terms off the Chamber board. Rick has provided wisdom, generously shared the very talented HR Green staff, and connected us to transportation officials. Thank you for the time you've shared, Rick. It was my privilege to serve with you. As we move forward, our focus ahead in 2016, I welcome Jeff Disterhoff as the board chairperson and look forward to serving the Chamber under his leadership and vision. Please welcome Jeff Disterhoff.
Well, again, good evening, and thank you for joining us at the Chamber's annual banquet. We fully recognize how busy everyone's schedules can be, and so we genuinely appreciate you carving out some time to be with us to celebrate not only past successes, but some of the things that we have going on in the year ahead. And to that end, as we look ahead to 2016, we indeed have several objectives that we're confident will really make or continue to show the Chamber as a value-added organization. We will help foster better business through international trade opportunities by co-hosting an International Entrepreneurship Summit with the University of Iowa this coming April. We'll convene task forces to move the needle on community initiatives such as education, which Scott mentioned a minute ago. We will enhance our leadership development programming, both in the Community Leadership Program as well as EPIC. And we're proud to bring LeaderCast, the largest one-day leadership event in the world, to our community this May. So lots of great things in the year ahead. On behalf of the entire Board of Directors, we thank you for your past involvement, and we thank you in advance for your continued support with these new initiatives. While I am indeed privileged to be your chair, the Chamber chair, board chair this year, I must confess that my first meeting of the year got off to a somewhat rocky and unanticipated start 3 days into the year when Nancy announced her resignation. Not exactly the beginning I was hoping for. We've got a table of credit union employees over there in the corner. Most of them would tell you that I'm not that enjoyable to work with, but usually it takes 3 or 4 months before folks figure that out. Nancy, being the overachiever, waited all of 3 days before she said I'd had enough of Jeff. So in all seriousness, though, I want to take a minute to commend Nancy and thank her for her leadership these past 10 years. We have been truly blessed to have her on board these past 10 years. She has been an invaluable leader. Oh, hold that for just a minute. So I'm just getting warmed up here. We're off script now, aren't we? You had no idea this was coming. Nancy really has been an invaluable leader, not only within the Chamber itself, but throughout the corridor and the state of Iowa as a whole. Working in concert with regional leaders, her efforts propelled the Chamber to new levels of success and impact, benefiting the community stakeholders throughout the area. And she's had the results to back this up. Over the course of the past 10 years leading the Chamber, she has, at the national level, represented Iowa on the National Association of Chamber Board Executives, and also successfully lobbied for a $230 million federal grant for passenger rail in Iowa and Illinois. At the state level, she has successfully lobbied for commercial property tax reform. At the regional level, she's convened the Group of Economic Development Collaboration, where representatives from municipalities, the county, the University of Iowa, and other economic development organizations discuss local issues on a regular basis. And at the local level, she launched the Buy Here campaign, which shifted over $6 million back into the local economy. She helped local businesses recover after the 2008 flood, and she has worked tirelessly with community partners to achieve Iowa City's designation as the certified Blue Zone site as well. So, in short, Nancy has a deep understanding of the community and the voice of its businesses, and is truly adept at bringing individuals together to create positive change. As I welcome her back to the podium, please join me in thanking Nancy for her vision, leadership, and commitment these past 10 years.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your kind words, Jeff. And any of you who are close to the Chamber know that none of that was about me. It's all about the amazing people that I get to work with every day. I work with a wonderful team. I go into the office every day and I know exactly what I'm going to get. People that are going to work hard, they're going to be positive, that truly, truly believe in the cause of helping business here. So thank you. I really appreciate that. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Tim McDougall is the founder and president of Built by Local Ventures. He helps local media companies across the country invest in early stage startups, specifically startups that need advertising and promotional support to get launched. Prior to building Built by Local in April of 2015, Tim was the VP of Strategic Innovation and publisher for The Gazette. Previously, he led major innovation and turnaround efforts at Miller Brewing Company, the Houston Rockets, and P.F. Chang's China Bistro. Tim is the 2016 president of the Engler Theater Board of Directors. His focus on innovation and creating opportunity from disruption led him to become deeply involved in the startup community as a mentor, as a supporter, and as a startup founder himself. Tim lives with his wife, Beth, who's absolutely charming, love talking with her tonight, and two multi-screen Minecraft mod-making digital native boys, one of whom's here tonight, Max, in the other half of Iowa's creative corridor, Cedar Rapids. Please join me in a warm welcome for Mr. Tim McDougall.
Thank you, Nancy, for the introduction. That was fantastic. And I have to confess, so that was fantastic. And I look over at this crowd, and this is a really good crowd. You're a well-dressed crowd. You are a polite crowd. You are a stable crowd. And that is not at all what I usually go to talk to, by the way. So when I get asked to do public speaking, I have a confession I'll start off with here. And the confession is that when I get asked to do public speaking, it is almost exclusively to talk to crazy people. Okay? That's usually my audience with this, and I have a clicker up here somewhere. So, and one group of crazy, there's two groups in particular. One crazy group, if you can see that over there, that's the Black Knight from Monty Python. One group I talk to is newspaper publishers and executives. And this is a group that, despite having tremendous disruption in their industry and most of their limbs being chopped off by disruption, would still, until very recently, tell you that things are generally going to be okay and we can keep doing business as normal. And usually my job out there is to tell them that's not the case. and we have to change faster. The other group that I talk to a lot are startups, and startups are equally crazy, right? Because startups, if you go to a conference with startups, every one of them will tell you their idea, and they believe this, their idea is going to be worth $1 billion. And they will also tell you that they know, because these are smart, driven people who study what startups do, and they know that 9 of the 10 startups around the room with them are going to be dead in 18 months. And they hold both of these thoughts in their head at the same time, and it's a great group to work with. So my company that I started up, so I've been a publisher, now I'm a startup, so I'm in both these worlds, really works to combine these two, right? We're not going to talk about my company, but basically what one of my advisors pointed out was that my business model in combining, my company combines media companies and connects them with startups, that my business model is basically crazy plus crazy equals dollars. And that's true. That's what I'm trying to get going on this. But that also meant that my normal material doesn't really work here. I can't harangue this group about being a more innovative newspaper company. That's not very relevant. And so when Nancy asked me to speak, I had to think about what would be a good topic for this group, right? And so I called a lot of people who work in innovation, who work with startups, who work in big companies with innovation, who work for chambers. And the topic that got people really excited was this one. It really started to gel around, and this led to hours and hours and hours of conversation. But the question became, so if you haven't figured out, I'm unhealthily fascinated with disruption and big institutions blowing up, and then the innovation that follows and comes after that. And the question became, can cities be disrupted? And if so, what can you do about that? And that's the big question. Now, before I get to answering those questions there, I first want to make sure that we're on the same page with disruption, because disruption has been a word that's been dramatically overused, and it's become a buzzy word, and it means different things to everybody. But what disruption really is, in the sense we're talking about it here, disruption is when a new technology comes along and basically obsoletes an old technology. And along the way with that, wipes out all the companies that use that old technology at the same time. And that's what disruption is. That's what we're talking about here. Now, as a way to explain that a little bit more, this is my wife and I, my wife who's out here, we're watching Fargo on FX. We were catching up on the DVR while I was preparing this. And if you didn't watch the last season of Fargo, I don't know if anybody else did besides us, but if you did watch it, it's in the 70s, and there's a scene where a police officer comes across a murder in a convenience store. And he has to, it's a rural scene, so he has to go and drive around to find a phone booth somewhere so he can call it in. And my first grader, who's not here tonight, my first grader happened to kind of wander through the room at the time, doing his first grader things, right? And he made us stop when that was on there. And he asked, he goes, what is that? What is this thing at the side of the road? What's this, like, it's metal and glass, and this guy's going into it, and what's he doing? So we had to explain. We were trying to be good parents. We said, well, back before they had cell phones, you know, if you had to make a call, you had to go find a payphone, and sometimes they were in these metal and glass booths, and you had to go inside, and you had to put coins in the slot, and you had to remember the phone number to call, because you didn't have anything else. And we thought we were being good parents and explaining this and educating our child, and his response was just this. His response was, Dad, that's hilarious. Why would you ever do something like that? That sounds so stupid. By the way, he also thinks that riding the train to work is completely ridiculous, and reading newspapers as your main source of information is, why would you ever do that? And trains, by the way, trains are okay if you work at Disneyland, he wanted to clarify, but other than that, there's no reason to ride a train to work. And he thinks that the idea that his parents used to get in the car and drive to one of these to go rent a movie and hunt for the movie we wanted, and it wouldn't even be in stock most of the time, he's really happy that he's here now because he's pretty convinced that his parents really weren't that sharp before he came along. He has no clue why we care what time TV shows are on. His TV stars are people like Captain Sparkles. Captain Sparkles is on YouTube. I heard no glimmer of recognition for Captain Sparkles out there, by the way. So somebody watches Fargo, I heard that. Nobody watches Captain Sparkles. But Captain Sparkles is on YouTube. He's on any time Owen wants to watch. And he would agree with this headline that was in the Washington Post about a year and a half ago that said, hey, TV is now increasingly for old people. And when you start hearing headlines like this and seeing this, that's a pretty clear sign that an industry is either in the middle of a huge disruption or is on the precipice of it. And this is TV as we grew up with it. Kids define TV as anything on YouTube or anything now, on Netflix. But traditional TV as we grew up with it is on the precipice of major disruption. We don't know what it's going to turn into, but we know it's changing right now. This, by the way, some people get upset when I tell this story because they think I'm making fun of them for liking TV and for liking newspapers, and I'm calling them old. I read newspapers. I watch way too much TV, so that's not the case. So I'm going to deflect from me any anger towards I'm going to do the great dad thing, right? Don't be mad at me. Be mad at my 7-year-old. This is Owen. And this is his first year he got to carve his own pumpkin, just so you know who your nemesis is on this. This is Owen getting to carve his first pumpkin, and we were good parents. We made sure he didn't cut his hand off. We made sure he didn't do that, but we let him carve whatever he wanted to on this. And he covered it up and didn't want to let us see what he was making, and he carved it in there and then turned it around and showed it to us. And we were being good parents, and we said, wow, that's amazing. Owen, that's fantastic. You're so creative. What is that? And I couldn't tell if that was like eyes that were on the bottom of the pumpkin's head, or if that was a mouth with some gnarly thing coming up from the bottom, or if that's just a nose that's gone wrong about 6 times. We couldn't quite figure out what that was. Anybody want to guess? Remember, it's a 6-year-old boy here, first grade boy. Anybody want to guess what that is? So if you guess at your table, if you guessed it's a pumpkin butt, if you guessed pumpkin butt, you win the bet. And his explanation for this was, Dad, everybody needs a butt. I looked at all your pumpkins, none of them had one. So I made the butt. And he did not carve a face. We displayed it with the butt facing out, by the way, for Halloween. Now, there's a couple things about disruption before we get into the questions about why you should care. Right? I just want to go 3 points on why you should care. One is that disruption, as we're seeing it, as new technologies replace old ones, the pace of this has accelerated rapidly, exponentially. In the olden days, disruptions would happen slowly. Cars would come along and replace horse and buggies. Airplanes would come across and replace passenger rail. We're seeing the pace of this happen so fast, it's happening in multiple industries at the same time right now. And whereas disruption used to mainly impact blue-collar workers, we're seeing it impact white-collar workers, which, looking out at this room, means that it's impacting more people in this room than it ever used to. In fact, if I look out in this room, I would bet that there's a large number of people who have either worked prior in a disrupted industry or are working for one right now. I've worked in 3, in marketing, advertising, publishing. They're all disrupted. Or if you don't work for one, there's a high chance that you will be working in a disrupted industry coming up. And usually when I say that, I usually get approached by somebody later who says, that's really interesting, and it's a good thing that whoever's approaching me, that I work in an industry that's disruption-proof. And the issue with that, and to explain that, we're going to talk about the Backstreet Boys for a second. But disruption is sneaky, right? Nobody usually sees it coming. If you were studying the music industry, which is one of the industries I study, so if you were studying the music industry in 1999, here's what you were talking about. You were talking about the Backstreet Boys, not because they had these spiffy white suits. I couldn't find one of these for the presentation to add it out, but not because of that, but because they had the #1 selling album of the #1 selling year in music industry history. And you were talking about people like Doug Morris, who headed Universal Music, and Jay-Z. And these were titans of industry, and this industry was going only up and to the right. Profits were huge. It was a runaway train. Nothing could stop it. That's what the press at the time, if you go back and look at clippings, was all saying. Nobody was talking about, what nobody was talking about in 1999 was how a Northeastern University in Massachusetts student dropped out, went on a 3-day Red Bull-fueled bender, and wrote a piece of software called Napster that made it super easy to download songs off the internet. The labels actually knew about this, and it annoyed them, but they didn't do much about it at the time, because this was college students in dorms. We have Jay-Z. What are we worried about a college student in a dorm for? And by the way, no real people, and this is actually in their board meetings of Universal, no real people listen to music on their computer anyway, so why should we care that much? We know what happened to the music industry. They're about 40% the size they were in 1999 right now. When the founder of BlackBerry, and keep in mind at the time this happened, BlackBerry was the #1 phone manufacturer in the world. When they got an advanced copy of the iPhone, because all this hype about the iPhone coming out back before it was out, nobody had seen one yet, he managed through whatever nefarious means to get a copy of the iPhone. And this is in their board transcripts. He brought it to the board, showed it, said, I have a copy of the iPhone, nobody else has seen it. And look, the thing has no keyboard. Ha! Its battery can't last 8 hours if you use it all day. It's basically a toy. It's not a threat. We don't need to do anything different. We're fine. And that was the difference. It's a toy. It's not a threat. We don't need to change anything we're doing. So disruption is very sneaky. And what you find out is that the next big thing always starts out, to the people that are in the industry, usually looks like a toy. It starts out looking that way, something you don't have to take seriously. So if you think you're in a disruption-proof industry, so did all the people who got disrupted before. The last thing I want to point out is that survival, when companies get disrupted and they're in a disrupted industry, very few actually survive or grow again, usually only 9%. 91% of them, if you look at the research, don't grow again at that point. The 9% that survive have cultures of constant maniacal innovation. And this is a theme that comes up in a few minutes again. But they have a culture of constant innovation, not just innovation of, hey, we added sparkles to it or we released it in a new color. The kind of innovation that says, we're going to create something that may put our current business out of business. We're going to disrupt ourselves before somebody else does. And that's very, very hard to do, because when you do that, by the way, and the people, if you're at a company that's trying to do this, everybody knows that if you do figure that thing out and you end up disrupting your old business, that a lot of your own employees may be irrelevant too, that may be obsoleted too. That's why it's so, so hard to do. That's why there's only 9% of companies, existing incumbents, that survive a disruption of their core technology. So from here, the question became, can cities be disrupted? And this is where many, many hours of conversation came out. And the conversation on this first point, can cities be disrupted? It always rolled out the same way. Have a group of people on the phone. The first response was, well, what are you talking about? Cities aren't companies, by the way. Cities are very diverse. When a company faces disruption, the company usually vaporizes. Cities don't vaporize and go away, so these are totally different things. They aren't parallel at all. And by the way, you're talking about Iowa City, because I was talking about Iowa City, because that's where I was going to go speak. And Iowa City has this great art scene, this great culture. It's the city of literature. It has, on one end of the corridor, there's Rockwell Collins. On the other end of the corridor, there's the university. And those are both huge institutions that aren't going anywhere. So what's the problem? The conversation would always pause at that point, though. And keep in mind, I'm talking to people who, like me, have this weird fascination with things blowing up and disruption and innovation. And everybody would realize then that if you look at any of the academic studies, the people who do analysts that try to predict what's going to be disrupted next, the people who investment banks pay to go figure this stuff out, the people at universities, every source you go to will say that, hey, on that list of things that we think are going to be disrupted next, universities are pretty high up there. Nobody knows, and this is their predictions. Their predictions may or may not come true, right? But I could put the last 12 big books on disruption up there, and each one has a chapter on here's how universities might be disrupted coming up. And that's not to say they will or they won't. It's all predictive stuff. But what it means is saying that, hey, we can't be disrupted because we're anchored by university and universities will never change is probably not a safe bet. We need to look at that much more closely and be much more aware of what could happen there. The other thing that came out of this is if you look at the current type of disruption and the pattern that's going on, what you see a lot of is that as disruptions roll through, the destruction you see, and remember, when we're talking about innovation and disruption, something gets destroyed and something else gets created to take its place. But what we're seeing now, which is different from the past, is that that pattern of destruction happens kind of evenly spread across all cities. But what gets created tends to be concentrated in only a few. So everybody feels a little bit of pain, but a few cities feel a lot of benefit. An example of that would be Uber. which I know has been a hot topic. So when Uber rolls through markets, all the taxi companies, wherever market they go into, decrease in value a little bit. Uber itself increases greatly in value. So the economy of San Francisco, where Uber is based, there's a big boost there, but there's a little bit of a drain everywhere else. The same thing happens with brick and mortar retail. If you look at brick and mortar retail, there's been a decline in store traffic. This is nationally, so there's variances in different areas. But store traffic at brick and mortar retail has been down 6 or 7% per year for the last 3 to 4 years. And there's many factors in that, but one of the biggest factors is that it's moving to online. And so again, you see destruction happening evenly, but you see growth happening wherever the major e-commerce hubs are. In this case, Seattle. A lot of business goes to Seattle. Amazon's the biggest e-commerce retailer. And what results out of that, when you talk to the people who are deeply into this, what they'll say is, hey, what we're seeing right now, and this is a phrase coined by Enrico Moretti out of Stanford, saying what we're seeing now is what we call the three Americas. And his background behind that, from World War II until the late 80s, early 90s, what we saw across communities and cities in the US was a convergence, where cities became more similar, household incomes became closer, the penetration of college graduates became closer. And in the last 15 years, we've seen a divergence, where this has spread apart. And the phrase that Moretti uses would say, hey, we're seeing the three Americas. The first America, the top one, is the cities that have the innovation hubs, that as this destruction and creation takes place, they're getting more than their fair share of the creation. And the cities at the bottom are losing more than their fair share because they're not picking up anything new that's created, and they oftentimes have heavy manufacturing bases, and they're losing more than their fair share. And most cities at this point are still in that middle part of America where they could go either direction. And there's a lot of work being done on this and a lot of thought, and there's a lot of different opinions. It's an evolving field. But the consensus tends to be, you know, if you do ridiculous things like go through 18 hours of transcripts from a conference in Cambridge, which I did, the consensus tends to be that the major determinant of whether a city goes from that middle America to the upper America or the lower America economically is the strength of their local innovation economy. And we talked earlier about this, whether a company survives disruption is largely dependent on do they have a really dense, innovative culture. What most that study this are saying, hey, whether a city falls in the upper or lower tier is dependent on a lot of factors, but dependent more than any other factors on how strong is their local innovation economy. So there tends to be a tie, and the conclusion ends up being that no, cities don't get disrupted the same way that companies do. But they still do feel the forces of disruption, and the forces of disruption and how cities handle innovation become big deals. They become critically important. So the question off of that became, okay, what can you do? The question would usually be, if you were going to be talking to a room of a lot of people in a hotel in Iowa City, Coralville, what are some of the things you could tell them? And there were hours and hours of conversation, so I'm not going to try and recap all of it. And I'm not going to try and give you a cookbook that says, hey, do these 5 things and magically you have a great local innovation economy. That's not possible. But here's the 5 things that we kind of coalesced the 5 things that people thought were most important, that if people could take in their heads and say, okay, I'm going to think about these 5 things, these were 5 good starting points. And the first is that, and this is an easy one to put first because most people agree with it and we're doing really well with this, is that you need to create safe space for your weirdos. And weirdos in this case means people who are into innovation or tech or developing or programming or startups or people in existing companies that are just total innovation nuts and want to drive this stuff. I can tell you that when I moved here, I moved to Cedar Rapids in 2010, and trying to find other people who were into innovation was really, really hard. You'll hear this from a lot of people about that era. There were innovators in the market, it was just really hard to find them. And there's people, so Amanda's sitting here at the front table. Amanda started a whole company to try and help connect people like that. And if you look at today now, there are 19 co-working spaces across the state that did not exist in 2010. There's a couple really well-regarded high-end accelerators that draw a lot of people in around innovation. There's things like 1 Million Cups every Wednesday morning, which draws 50 to 80 people in Cedar Rapids and in Iowa City to talk about innovation. There's all kinds of things. Right? The ecosystem's gotten much better on that. It's much easier to find other innovators. Now, this isn't the end game. This is just kind of setting the table so people can talk to each other and find each other. But we're actually doing really well on that, and it's still growing. Last week, NewBoCo was announced in Cedar Rapids, and that's really an umbrella organization to help pull together all the different innovation activities that have kind of focused in that city around the New Bohemia area. But that was done very well and is very promising in that. So this is still growing, but we're doing well as a community on this. The second point that people, and I put this in here because this is also kind of a setting the table thing, and it's a longer term setting the table piece. And it gets a little more controversy around it. But there was a huge desire, if you talk to innovators, that we need to expose every kid to experiential learning. And there were two things that drove this, right? The first thing that drove this was people saying, hey, our schools are really good at producing really smart kids who are ready to go to a cubicle and take direction. They aren't as good right now producing kids who have the confidence and the experience to say, I can go build something, I can go make something. I can go do something. If you're going to, knowing that we are in a community, this was pointed out, and I talked to mainly people in the Midwest about this, that it's going to be hard for us to pull people from New York or San Francisco who are innovation economy minded people. We have to do more to grow our own. And this is one of the ways to grow your own. So this picture right here, if you can see it, is I happen to work in Vault Co-working in Cedar Rapids, is where I office out most of the time. Also in Vault Co-working is the Iowa Big School, which is an experiential learning program done in coordination with the Cedar Rapids School District. And these are high school students at Van Meter in Cedar Rapids, and they are talking to Van Meter about installing heat sensors around the Van Meter plant so they can track employee movement and improve Van Meter's efficiency. I was lucky to find my locker consistently in high school. These kids are doing really amazing things, and this Van Meter has said this will greatly improve their business. And by the way, I just had to put this in here because they showed me a video they made, and while they were waiting for their meeting with the people at Van Meter, they took a heat sensor and put it on a drone and flew it over the building. And this was like 2 weeks ago, right? And they saw this pattern in the video with the heat sensor, and they took it to the engineers at Van Meter who said, oh my gosh, that means we have defective rivets all over our building that are leaking heat, or in the summer, leaking air conditioning. And those rivets are actually really easy to repair. We just didn't know they were broken. And we can fix those. And by the way, the cost savings we'll have if we fix those are going to more than pay for any program we can do with the big school. Okay? This was this was an eye-opener for them. If it was that easy to figure out that there's this huge way to save money at Van Meter just by putting a sensor on a drone and flying it over. And these are kids, these are high school kids figuring this stuff out. And there needs to be more programs like that. The third point, and this is where it gets a little more uncomfortable for some people to talk about, but if you're looking at building a local innovation economy, it can't only be about jobs. And that's not saying jobs are bad, jobs are great, we want more jobs. But the point people will bring up, and people get very animated about this point, is, and I'll use Pinterest as an example. And I could use any one of 40 or 50 or 100 companies here. But Pinterest I'll use because this was founded by an Iowan. Ben Silberman out of Des Moines founded Pinterest. And in 2010, Pinterest was worth $1 billion. Pinterest, when it was worth $1 billion, had 20 employees. 20, that's it. It's an innovation economy company. It is not a labor-intensive company. And today, Pinterest, it wasn't just paper money. Today, Pinterest is worth $11 billion, and they employ around 600 people. And the point that people were making was, if you're going to try and if you want to drive jobs, drive jobs. But if you want to drive an innovation economy, jobs can't be the main metric you look at. Because most of these companies that are innovation companies, part of their innovation is that they find ways to get a lot of value creation out of less resources, like Pinterest has done with this. And that if you optimize for a number of jobs created, what they see tends to happen is you tend to, and this is not I'm not casting doubt on any single program that's happened here. This is from other states, people saying this too. What tends to happen is that you tend to you tend to start recruiting and looking for very labor-intensive companies that tend to have older technologies, that tend to not grow once you put them in. Not all the time, but that tends to be the bias starts to happen if you're optimizing for a number of jobs created in the short term. And their only point was, if you're going to build an innovation economy, that can't be the sole metric. And usually, right now, in our current climate, that is the sole metric that gets used. The fourth point was an easy one. And this is one, and this conversation happened even out in the waiting room out here, that affordable quality of life can't be the sales pitch. Now, I'm guilty of this. When I've gone to conferences and taught people about how great Iowa is, I tell them what everybody else says. Hey, you can do all the great innovation you can do on the coast or anywhere else, just with a more affordable quality of life here. Okay? I say that. I've heard Nancy say that. I've heard Mark Nolte say that. When I talk to people in Kansas City, Minneapolis, Des Moines, St. Louis, Cedar Falls, Omaha, they all said, yep, we use that same exact sales pitch. And the issue becomes, and I started off as a marketer, right? That's not differentiated at all. In fact, one person, a guy named Adam Arredondo, who's a big community builder in Kansas City, he screamed so loud the phone cut out. But his point was, hey, all that means is you're just one of 500 cities that is not named New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles or Seattle or Austin. That's all it means. Because everybody knows if you live in New York, you know if you move to Iowa, it's more affordable. Or if you move to Minnesota, it's more affordable. If you move to Kansas, it's more affordable. Everybody knows all this already. And then the discussion became, well, what do you talk about then? Because we've all been guilty of it. And the response was great. The response was, wait, you're talking about Iowa City here, for example. You have amazing stuff in Iowa City. That was where I really could have messed up in this presentation. You have amazing stuff in Iowa City. Use that. You have all this great stuff that's unique to your city, and there are messages going on. There are people in the city crafting messages about that, but when we all go out and talk about it, what we default to is affordable quality of life. There's great stuff happening here that people are talking about, and especially in Iowa City is just rich with it. The last point I want to bring up, and we'll close on this, because this is the one point where I asked people if you could say one thing, what's the one most important thing that you're most passionate that a group like this should understand? And what they said very loudly was that, look, at the end, connections and resources are the currency of an innovation economy. That's what makes it move. Having enough resources for innovators, having enough connections. And that's not just entrepreneurs, that's companies that have innovation efforts going on inside of them. That's government, that's university. Connections and resources are the currency. And Diana Kander, who's coming here at University of Iowa to talk next week, her comment on this was, look, and she was very passionate about it. She's very smart. She's great. And what she said was, hey, look, all these things about co-working spaces and happy hours and cheerleading and all this, that's all good, but that's all setting the table. At the end of the day, if you're not doing everything you can do to provide resources and connections, the rest does not matter. Now, from an individual standpoint, people ask, well, I don't have $1 million. I can't go invest. I can't provide those resources. That's true for most people in this room. On an individual level, that means, you know, if you believe in this and want to find out how you can contribute from a resources or connection standpoint, that means go see a startup pitch. They happen all the time in this community right now. Every week there are startup pitches, like 1 million cups on Wednesdays. At the accelerators we have at Venture School, which is doing a fantastic job rolling that program out around the state. Go watch ones, give them some feedback, and see if you have in your contacts anybody that could help them out. Because if you're starting a company, and I know this from my own experience, if you're having those kind of connections, having somebody say, hey, I have a friend who is in an established business that could help you out or could give you some advice, those connections are gold. From the resources standpoint, from an individual level, you know, oftentimes it's just buy stuff. You know, if you buy their stuff, if you want to buy flowers, buy them from Bouquets. I used this for Valentine's Day. I used Bouquets. They're great. They're a Des Moines startup that came through Cedar Rapids for the accelerator. Go on Kickstarter tonight and look up Girls with Ideas. Okay, I can't explain the whole program here, but just watch the video. It's a 3-minute video. By the end, half of you, if you watch it, you will give the $10 that they're asking for to help this program go. It's a fantastic program. Or if that's not your thing, I'll throw out Gentleman Care, which is a University of Iowa student started this up. If you want to have really snazzy, spiffy men's luggage, this is great. And there's 50 or 100 of these things out there, right? And we're even putting up a site. Some people helped me get a site, and we've only got it half up, but a site that says it's called www.buyiowastartupstuff.com to help make it easier for people to go and find these things. But if you're at the organizational level, so this is for individuals level, but if you're at the organizational or looking at the community level, what we need to ask ourselves are questions like, do we make it easy enough? Do we incent investors to invest in local startups here in our own local economy? Do we have a fund that can help? And we do have some funds. Do we have a fund that can help new ideas get started? Is that fund big enough? Is it active enough? Does it spread around to enough different ideas? We need to ask, Do we incent existing companies, established companies, to work with local startups the same way that we incent them to work with women and minority-owned businesses? That's an and, by the way, not an or. All of that's good, but do we incent them to reach out to local startups and make it easier to work with them? All these things are really critical. Do we have people, and oftentimes the chambers and the economic development groups are really well positioned to do this. Do we have people who are maniacally focused, and we do have some in this market, who are maniacally focused on trolling the chambers of universities, of established companies, of the startup ecosystem, and trying to find the connections out there that can be made to increase the currency of these systems and help this system grow. And I'm going to go off script just a little bit because, this part about, I have my startup, and I'm going to have tough talks. I'm way off script here, but I'm going to have tough talks next week because we've had some changes in the market situation and changes with some key investors about whether we can keep it going or not, or whether we can find a way to pivot and turn it a little bit and keep it going. And that's going to be a very hard conversation. Now, if we decide we can't keep it going, that's going to be because that was the best thing to do. It'll still be a horrendous gut punch, devastating blow to do that. But if you're in innovation, what you realize, and I've been doing innovation work for 25 years now, if you're in innovation, what you realize, and you have to go knowing that these kind of conversations happen, because only 25% of innovations in a company, in corporate level innovations, succeed. Only 25% of big innovations. Only 10% of startups succeed. If you're going to be pushing innovation on the front line of it, you know you're going to have these kind of things happen. And if you don't have, and to be honest, if these things happen and you don't have a community pushing behind you, adding wind behind your back, these things become devastating and demoralizing. What happens, and I've seen this in companies I've worked for, I've seen this in communities, people just stop innovating. And your hopes of having a strong local innovation economy at that point go away. And so these kind of community support things are critically, critically important. And if you've taken anything away from this, you may believe some things I said are no things, but if you take anything away from this, the first thing is going to be pumpkins have butts. I know that. But I also take away that, I hope you take away that disruption and the factors we're seeing in business right now can also affect communities. And we are at that teetering point as a community of do we go to the upper part or the lower part? And the key to that, the key to doing that is what in innovation work we often call hugging the monster, going to find that thing that scares you and going to find a way to embrace it and not run in fear from what the change is coming, but go find the change that's happening and be part of the change and be part of the disruption before it happens to you. Thank you all very much. May have gone a few minutes over, but thank you very much for your time.
It's always great when you can go out at the top of your game. Tim McDougall, thanks for taking me out at the top of my annual banquet game. Fantastic. Another thank you to Procter Gamble. Mike, we really appreciate the sponsorship, and International Automotive Components. We are very, very grateful for all that you do to support your chamber. Thanks very much for coming tonight. Have a great evening.
You're watching City Channel 4. On TV, online, on demand, on Facebook, and now on the go on your mobile device.